I'm gonna be nice about her. I've met her once. Victoria Derbyshire, who fits in very nicely at the BBC, decided to take on Jeremy Clarkson, who was down there supporting farmers. We all know about his farm. This is how he took on the BBC, who he describes as the message board for this infernal bloody government. Have a listen.
So it's not about you, it's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax?
Classic BBC there, classic. Oh yeah, it's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. OK, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot, OK? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do.
He also said, for the sake of everyone here and all the farmers stuck at home today paralysed by a fog of despair by what's being foisted upon them by this infernal government, I beg the government to accept this was rushed through, wasn't thought out and was a mistake. Many people getting involved as the farmers' protest gathers strength. Kemi Badenoch has just spoken on stage at the farm tax protest in Westminster. She said that MPs like her, whose constituencies include rural areas, know what farming is like, and she said they would, if they were in power, the Tory party, they would reverse that. Jeremy Clarkson, Kemi Badenoch, everybody getting involved. Are you supportive of the farmers? I hope so. We are here at Talk. 0344 499 1000. That's the telephone number you need. Ryan's in. It's the A-team. Our Jodie's back. She had a cold. Cameron applied Vic to her chest. Not my wife. Don't worry about it. 87222. Start your message with the word talk. Amy's smiling and the delightful Mia is pushing the buttons. Also, another important thing. Yes, mad Vladimir Putin vows revenge. He might launch a nuke, and I know I should worry about that. We'll no doubt talk about it. But even more exciting, you know that old water cooler moment? Do you know what everybody's talking about today? They're not talking about Vladimir Putin. They might be talking about farmers. They're talking about freezing Britain. They're talking about the fact that certain people woke up this morning to snow. Tell us your story. I came to work. This is no word of a bleeding lie. There's a bloke outside in a pair of sliders, shorts, and one of those American baseball vests just walking around looking at the shard, and I'm thinking, you must be freezing to death. No idea. Now, 0344 419 1000. It's 7 minutes past 4. It is Tuesday afternoon, and we are delighted to be welcomed by, well, I would have to say, one of our finest guests weekly, James Price, former government special advisor. Good afternoon.
You're far too kind, sir. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm up in arms. Genuinely mean this. I didn't know, and I admit a degree of ignorance. I live rurally. I think farmers are the lifeblood of this country for foodstuff and all sorts of things, livestock. Farmers must pay for the NHS, says Rachel Reeves. They've levied in the budget this extraordinary inheritance tax. And as I just said then, and I'd love your take on this, I didn't realise the very small margin of money that farmers can take out against the value, really, in terms of what it returns, of a farm. So when Labour go, oh, they've got a £3 million farm, they might be getting £30,000 to £40,000 a year out of that. Not what Labour imagine.
It's hard to know where to start with this, and I'll try and keep my cool, my usual sleek and professional exterior. This makes me so mad, and I don't think it's just because I've been at that protest from about 10 o'clock to about 2 o'clock and stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the finest people that this country has produced, you know, real proper men and women and children who work on these farms, who get up very early every day, who do very difficult work to keep us well fed, to keep, you know, Britain's farms ticking over and nice healthy produce. I don't need to extol the virtues of the English countryside to people who are watching and listening to this, but the idea that Rachel Reeves, not content with lying about her CV, lying about being a chess champion, lying in the fact that she plagiarised her book, lying about everything that was in that budget, lying about everything that was happening in the Labour manifesto beforehand, is saying they have to do this to fund the NHS is despicable, Jeremy. It will fund the NHS for about 25 hours in the first year that this starts working. And then, of course, all the economic damage that happens when you smash up all of these farms anyway, and they end up getting sold off to the Chinese, who will probably put solar panels on there that they'll be able to turn off when we really need them to, or other kind of eco-loony activities. But the fact is that we could reduce the foreign aid budget in the UK, which a lot of which, by the way, goes to foreign farms. It'd be a lot easier to farm in some warmer countries where you haven't got to go and brush ice and snow snow off the kit every morning, the way they've had to do this morning here. The foreign aid budget, it's its lowest level it's been for about 17 years. It's only something like £13.7 billion a year that we send abroad. And
you
this
know what
measure,
somebody said?
according to the budget...
I want to jump in, because somebody said to me just very quickly, they said to me last night, I was watching you, and you really are right-wing, aren't you? And I said, what do you mean by that? Well, you know, you keep going on about how we shouldn't be doing things for other people. And I just basically, it's a mate of mine, I said, no, you're missing the point. We seem to be under this government, Jay, screwing the very people, in fact, the absolute people who have given something to our country, be they pensioners, be they ex-veterans, or, as you quite rightly say, farming folk. And by the way, it's not just farming. What about all the ancillary businesses? What about everything? Feeds, machinery, all of that. It's a huge, huge thing. I don't know whether the Labour Party... We can make jokes. And somebody said the nearest Starmer and Reeves have been to a farm is to the farmers' market in Islington. But I'm not even prepared to joke about it. It's like they don't get it, or they are on a mission to destroy anybody who's given anything to Great Britain, whilst wiping the backside of people who don't, frankly, deserve jack.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. It would be easy to make lots of jokes about this, about the fact that Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, has Croydon North as his seat. I actually used to be a constituent of his living in Croydon. There's not very many patches of farmland that I was able to see in the years in which I lived there. We could make these jokes, but it's not funny. These are people's livelihoods. This is, you know, one chap who spoke at this rally talked about his family farming the same patch of land for over 170 years. Yeah. He was the 6th generation. His son, who was up on stage with him, is meant to be the 7th generation, may now no longer be able to do that. And for what? For a tiny, palpable, and probably very temporary increase in spending. I was going to say that the budget for foreign aid, which again is sending hard-earned taxpayers' money abroad on, I think, often very spurious cases, £13.7 billion. This will raise, according to the budget, £560 million. I've done the maths just before coming on air. That means if we reduce the foreign aid budget by 4.09%, we wouldn't need to do this. So why are we still doing it? And I'm afraid, as you say, it's not fun anymore. No. The reason I think this is happening, there's the old saying that a purpose of a system is what it does. The idea being that why are they trying to destroy rural communities? I think it's the same reason they've been putting VAT on those fancy private schools I didn't get to go to, is to destroy those areas. Why are they putting up capital gains tax on entrepreneurs and hardworking business people? To drive them away. They are deliberately, I'm afraid, and by the, as you said, attacking pensioners and indeed not helping people in the armed forces. They are trying to create a wonderful, more equal society.
Well, I'd call it a nanny state. Listen, Jay, don't go anywhere. This is Steve Reed. This is the Secretary for Environment and Local Affairs and whatever else. Constituency Croydon North, no farming community at all. Have a listen to Mr. Reed's explanation, my friends.
These figures have been validated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility and the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies, the independent financial think tank. So I have every reason, and we should all have every reason, to believe that this data, projections based on actual hard data, is accurate and that the vast majority of farms will not be affected.
Well, that's absolute rubbish, isn't it, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, again, these numbers don't need to be real. They just need to be defensible long enough for Labour to ram this through with their engorged and artificially inflated majority, because we all know, I'm afraid it was my party, the Conservatives, that lost that election rather than Labour winning it. They've just got to do it just long enough for this to go through and for it to start working its horrible and irrevocable damage. One of the main tenets of conservatism, as propounded by wonderful philosophers, people like Roger Scruton, who everyone should go and watch on YouTube or have a read, is that things are very easy to destroy and they're very hard to create and to build and to maintain. Once these things get destroyed, it will be almost impossible for us to rebuild it again. And that's what they're trying to do, whether it's the school system, whether it's our economy, whether it's our armed forces.
I'll tell you what it is.
Certainly whether it's pensioners dying of cold or whether it's rural communities.
It's almost as if there is this blind belief that approaching... To me, you're right, it's all about an equal society. It's almost saying to anybody who's made a success of their lives, before I get on to the farming community, well, you know what, you've made a success, and yes, you might have created wealth which has filtered down and benefited society, but you're doing better than the next person, so we're going to absolutely stamp all over you. The thing about the VAT on schools and the thing about farming, to me, goes further. It's a complete and utter lie. To imagine that every person who sends their kids to private school is a multi-millionaire. It's an absolute lie to believe that every single farmer, as you said, I was speaking to somebody earlier, passed down by generations, in fact, probably most of them, would prefer to be doing a different job. But because of loyalty to their family and passing it down, they work 20 hours a day for very little return, and they're being screwed by this government. We've actually got a farmer on. Don't go anywhere. Matthew has a small farm in Cranbrook in Kent. Matthew, you're on Talk Drive. A very good evening.
Oh, good evening. Thanks for taking my call.
Not at all. James Price is with me. What do you want to say?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, all inheritance tax is wrong anyway, because it shouldn't be charged unless you sell your property. But the other thing is, I've got a little small holding, and if I wanted to, it'll be under the threshold of $1 million. But if I was to pass it down, wishing that my son takes it further and further, he's going to be, oh, well, don't make it better or don't make it bigger because it's not worth it. So therefore, the government will lose more tax because it's not worth creating more acres to go with it, because you're just going to lose it at the other end of it. It's totally wrong.
And that's like business rates. That's like saying to business owners, don't make a success of it in whatever way. Just don't, because we'll screw you even more. Tell me, Matt, right? You might be political, you might not be. You're watching and listening to Talk. But what do you make of this government and the fact they seem to be attacking the very lifeblood of this country? Pensioners, farmers, veterans. They don't seem to care.
No, they haven't got a clue, because they've never been in the real world and started from nothing and tried to, create a path for better things, and it's all done in the classroom, and they don't understand the real world, and it's not going to change until we get a change of government again, unfortunately.
Matt, thank you so much indeed. Cranbrook in Kent, smallholders. How interesting is that, James, that he actually says there's no point in me making a success of my life or trying to build my business because I'll just be screwed even more?
He's absolutely right. We just have, what's his name, Matt? We just have him on every week. There is a kind of taxation that goes out. They're called, this is technical, they're called Pigouvian taxes. And the idea is you start putting a tax on something and it's meant to disincentivize people from doing that activity or buying that product. So think something like cigarettes. You make them more expensive all the time with taxes. The idea is to stop people doing it. So there's taxes on cigarettes and on alcohol and on, petrol cars increasingly. And soon it'll be chocolate and, well, there's the sugar tax.
Walking down the bloody road. Right? Walking down the road, yeah.
What happens when you put taxes on things like hard work, on income taxes, on taxes like inheritance, on building things, and on capital gains? Of course, you disincentivize people from wanting to go and do something about it. There's an amazing example, counter-example, from communist China. And I know that our dear leader, Keir Starmer, met the current communist dictator, Xi Jinping, in Rio yesterday.
But not the farmers in his own... But not farmers in his own country whose livelihoods are in the toilet. No, not at all.
Exactly right. And so in communist China, they followed the process in the Soviet Union, where Stalin went after the kulaks, who were the sort of slightly wealthier peasants, and killed them all off and destroyed them all and turned them all into state-owned farms. I wonder where we're going with this. In China, there was this little area, and they secretly got together, even though they were all meant to have to just apportion everything out absolutely equally, no matter how hard people worked. And they all got together and they said, okay, look, we're going to have this strip of land, you have that strip of land, we'll work that bit, and if we make anything extra, we just won't tell anybody, but we'll keep it ourselves, okay? Okay, deal. They went and did this, and they all worked so hard, competing against each other, that the harvest was better than the last 5 years' worth put together. It was so good that the authorities saw it, and they were very lucky that Mao was dead, and there was a sort of reforming zeal in that these people were praised for it rather than shot. And it was only this process that let even the communists in China see, oh, you let people own their land, you let them keep more of what they earn themselves, they don't starve, and they go on to do things and to prosper. So Labour, if you believe what you hear, they're not into aspiration, and that's what I mean. Elon Musk, who's now the second most powerful man in the world, it seems, he says that Britain, I mean, a lot of people offended by this, I think he's spot on, is likely to go full Stalin. That's how he describes the tax rate on farmers. Now, that might be rhetoric, but farmers are not... what I find so difficult, Jay, is that we seem to be now, as a society and as a country, making it easy for people who commit crime, who shouldn't be here, who garner the system, to really do OK. And yet what we say to hard-working people is, get jams, as I call them, I do it every day on the show, just about managing. You've never broken the law. You've never had a handout. Well, sod you. We're going to kick you in the nuts again and again and again. And I genuinely believe, and I used this analogy for the last 2 weeks, what Trump did in America, a lot of people find him, the language, whatever,
I tell you, 80+ million Americans went, not interested in identity politics, not interested in crap like that. I want cheaper gas in my car, cheaper groceries. I want the migration problem sorted out, and I want a better life for me and my family. And I think that is going to happen here. I genuinely believe it has to happen here. Has to.
Yeah, I think you're right. This would be a different conversation we'd be having if Labour had come in and they'd got growth already going gangbusters, and they'd sealed up the border and they'd thrown all these disgusting criminals who seem to be ruling the streets in prison for very, very long prison sentences. No,
they're in hotels. They're fine. They're not wet today, are they, like people on the streets?
But these are the things that they're prioritising, going after farmers. You know, some of your viewers and listeners will remember that old question, who governs Britain, right? I think the question these days ought to be, in whose interest is Britain being governed? Yesterday there's a story that an illegal immigrant who was denied asylum here but wasn't deported and then managed to get to stay because he'd started a relationship and had a kid. It turned out that he had, and I'm sorry to go, I won't go into too much detail on this, done the most unspeakable things you can imagine to his own stepdaughter and nieces.
Is this the Congolese migrant? Oh,
That's
yeah, this is
exactly the case, right?
Listen to this,
my
God.
So this chap, he did the worst things you can imagine to his own stepdaughter and nieces, and will again not be deported, even though he wasn't allowed to, he failed his asylum the first time round, will not be deported because of his own right to a family life. Bear in mind what he's done to his own family.
His right to a family life under the ECHR, and apparently the fact that I'll go further, raped his own stepdaughter. Forget her, forget all of this. The bottom line is you're entitled to stay. And I have to say, mate, and I could hear it when you first came on, and I share your frustration. I'm glad that JC was down there doing his business. The farming community is so central to this country, and to me, the government, again, completely blind to it. Where does it end? Will they back down, the government, yes or no, Jay?
I hope that they'll find some kind of workaround that will allow them to elegantly step down without losing too much face. But if they think this is the end of it, there's not. And look, I know I've been very angry in this, and I've not cracked as many jokes as I might usually like to, but to end with perhaps a bit of hopefulness in it. In this march, there were tens and tens of thousands of people. I've never seen such a good-natured, hopeful, honest, decent, hard-working bunch. You don't often see that in the capital very often anymore, but you walk past the cenotaph, the monument to the glorious dead, as it's written on the side. And not only was there a minute's silence at the start of this protest in honour of all of those in the world wars who kept farming to keep the empire and then later the country going and keep us being fed, but people would walk past and I watched them just spontaneously stop and lower their heads and send off a little prayer to whatever gods in which they believe. It's a pretty far cry from what we've seen at that cenotaph in recent years. You saw Charlie Gilmore, that idiot, swinging off one of the flags. At least he got some jail time for it. Some other little oik from the Black Lives Matter protest tried to set fire to those flags and got away with a conditional discharge. But today, it was great honour and respect and wonder. And it shows that, as Tennyson said, although much is taken, much abides, and we're still a great country, and we'll get through much worse than this.
And Jay, just to finish, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that my point about America coming back here, I think that all politicians of all parties, your party, the current government, need to be really, really, really careful, because the British people are more, I'm not saying they're invested in politics, but they're more switched on, and there is a groundswell of anger that is not going to go away. Mate, it's always a pleasure. Really appreciate you being on, and love the fact that we as a station, James Price has been down there, Russell Quirk's on later, he was down at the march today. James Price, former special advisor on Talk Drive 423.